Imagine you're standing in a mountain village in the middle of Europe. People are going about their day, shopping, laughing, arguing, but you can't understand a single word they're saying. Not because you don't speak their national language. You do. But this language? It's something else entirely. Something ancient. Something that doesn't belong to any language family on the planet. Welcome to the world of the Basques. And trust me, this story is about to blow your mind. Deep in the Pyrenees Mountains, sitting right on the border between Spain and France, lives one of the most fascinating peoples in all of human history. They call themselves Euskaldunak, and their language, Euskara, is what linguists call a language isolate. That means it has no known relatives, none, zero. Every other language in Europe can trace its roots back to a common ancestor. French, Spanish, Italian, German, English, Russian, they all come from the same ancient Proto-Indo-European trunk. But Euskara? It just stands there, completely alone, like a tree that grew from a seed nobody has ever seen before. Now, you might be thinking, okay, lots of languages are old. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. When Celtic warriors were sweeping across Europe around 500 BC, the Basques kept speaking their language. When Roman legions conquered nearly the entire continent and turned everything Latin, the Basques kept speaking their language. When Germanic tribes tore apart the Western Roman Empire, the Basques kept speaking their language. When Arabic-speaking Moorish forces ruled most of the Iberian Peninsula for nearly 8 centuries, the Basques, you guessed it, kept speaking their language. Every one of those conquests erased the languages of the people they conquered. Every single one. Except Euskara. It survived them all. The Romans were baffled by it. They called the Basques Vascones and complained in their records that the language was so completely foreign, so structurally alien, that their interpreters couldn't even get a foothold in it. Roman administrators who ran everything from Britain to Egypt, people who were used to navigating dozens of different cultures, struggled to communicate with Basque villagers. That tells you something. And the language itself carries strange clues to its age. Euskara's counting system is based on 20s, not 10s, a mathematical pattern that suggests it developed in complete isolation from the numerical thinking common in the rest of the world. It has words like eitz, meaning rock, meaning water, and su, meaning fire. Terms so simple, so fundamental, that linguists believe they represent some of humanity's oldest surviving vocabulary. These aren't borrowed words from neighboring languages. They're original. They're ancient. They may connect us to a time before civilization as we know it even existed in Europe. But as wild as the language mystery is, it's only the beginning of the story. Because when scientists started looking at Basque blood, things got even stranger. Back in the 1940s, medical researchers were doing routine blood studies across Europe when they stumbled onto something that genuinely shocked them. The Basque population had the highest concentration of Rh-negative blood of any group ever tested, roughly 47% in some communities. To put that into perspective, most European populations sit around 15%. The Basques were off the charts. They also showed over 50% type O blood, creating a genetic fingerprint that looked unlike anything else on the continent. For decades, this sat in scientific journals as a fascinating but unexplained anomaly. It hinted at deep isolation. It hinted at ancient origins. But it didn't tell the full story. That would have to wait for the age of DNA. Now, here's where things get truly extraordinary. In 2021, an international team of researchers led by Dr. David Comas at the University of Barcelona launched the most comprehensive genetic study of Basque populations ever conducted. They weren't just looking at a handful of markers. They analyzed over 600,000 genetic data points across the full genome of 200 Basque individuals, people whose 4 grandparents all came from the same tight geographic areas, ensuring clean, representative samples. Then they compared that data against nearly 2,000 individuals from across Europe and the Mediterranean. The results rewrote everything. What the DNA revealed was not what anyone expected. The Basques weren't some mysterious long-distance migrants from a lost civilization. They weren't the remnants of an alien culture parachuted into the Pyrenees. They were something far more remarkable. They were the original Europeans, or at least the closest living descendants of them. Their genetic profile traced directly back to the early farming populations of Iron Age northern Spain. And here's the jaw-dropping part. Those ancient genetic profiles from Iron Age burials, they were virtually identical to modern Basque DNA. Across more than 2,000 years of European history, 2,000 years of invasions, plagues, crusades, empires rising and falling, the Basque genetic signature had barely moved. The average Spanish person today carries DNA from at least 6 distinct ancestral groups. The Basques, they still look genetically like early Iron Age Europeans. That is absolutely unheard of. Dr. Comas described the findings as unlike anything his team had ever seen in a European population. The Basques weren't just genetically unique. They had actively maintained that uniqueness while literally surrounded by genetic mixing for over 2 millennia. The question that burned in everyone's mind was, how? How does a people stay that genetically isolated in the middle of a continent that has been one giant melting pot for thousands of years? The answer, it turns out, was hiding in plain sight. It was the language. The 2021 study revealed something no one had been able to definitively prove before. Euskara itself had functioned as a genetic barrier, not just a cultural one, a literal biological one. The data was startlingly precise. Areas where the Basque language had always been spoken showed the strongest genetic isolation. Regions where the language had been historically present but later faded showed intermediate genetic mixing. And areas where Euskara had never taken root showed much higher rates of genetic blending with surrounding populations. The correlation was almost perfect. Language equals genetics. Lose the language, and within a few generations, the genetic distinctiveness starts to blur. Even more astonishing was what the researchers found when they zoomed in even further. Different Basque dialects, the regional variations of Euskara spoken in different valleys, correlated with distinct genetic subgroups within the Basque population itself. Scientists could literally look at someone's DNA and predict which dialect their family had spoken for generations. In some cases, they found genetic differences between Basque communities just 15 kilometers apart, closer than many supposedly distinct populations elsewhere in Europe. 15 kilometers. That's a short drive. But the language boundary between those communities had acted like a wall. Take the valley of Roncal in Navarre. This isolated community of shepherds, speaking their own distinct variety of Euskara, showed genetic patterns that had remained essentially unchanged for over 1,000 years. Marriage records from the 16th century show that more than 90% of Basques married someone who spoke the same dialect, not just the same language, but the same specific regional form of it. And church records from the 14th century list family surnames that you can still find in those same villages today. The same families, the same valleys, 7 centuries of European upheaval, and they stayed put. But language alone doesn't fully explain it. The Basques also built a web of cultural practices that, whether intentionally or not, acted as a kind of identity preservation system. One of the most powerful was their inheritance custom called itexi, which translates roughly as house. In most of medieval Europe, when a landowner died, his property was divided among all his children. This meant families constantly had to forge alliances with outsiders, bringing in spouses from different communities. The Basques did the opposite. Their entire farm passed undivided to a single heir. And crucially, it didn't have to be the oldest son. It could be the oldest daughter. The family chose the heir who would best maintain the household, regardless of gender. This had profound consequences. Basque women enjoyed rights that were completely unheard of in the rest of medieval Europe. They could inherit land. They could run businesses. They could choose their own marriage partners without needing to be traded off to seal political alliances with distant families. And when they chose their partners, they naturally tended to choose within their own linguistic communities, people who shared their values, their customs, their way of life. Generation after generation, this pattern reinforced itself. The cultural system and the genetic isolation fed each other in a loop that lasted for millennia. Even Basque sports played a role. The traditional game of pelota, a fast, intensely physical ball game played against church walls, had rules that varied from village to village. The social networks built around these local games, the tournaments, the rivalries, the celebrations, all of it created bonds that rarely stretched beyond Euskara-speaking communities. When your entire social world exists within a linguistic boundary, your family tends to form within that boundary too. And then there's the mythology. Basque creation stories feature ancient earth goddesses, most prominently Mari, who was said to rule from the peaks of the Pyrenean Mountains. These myths contain elements that appear nowhere else in European culture. No parallels in Greek mythology, no echoes in Norse tradition, no borrowed threads from Roman religion. Just utterly original cosmological thinking that appears to stretch back to Europe's pre-Indo-European past. The same deep, dark prehistory that their genetics connect them to. Recent archaeological work has added more layers to this picture. Excavations at the Arlampe cave in the Bizkaia region of the Basque country revealed evidence of continuous human occupation with remarkable tool-making consistency across vast stretches of time. At another prehistoric site called Peñaforua, researchers uncovered what appears to be an ancient dairy operation. Cattle bones showing evidence of selective breeding that produced animals strikingly similar to modern Basque livestock. The same animals, the same land, possibly thousands of years of continuity in farming practice. It's the kind of evidence that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Because of their unusual genetic history, the Basque people have also become an invaluable resource for medical researchers. Populations that have remained relatively unmixed for long periods are like natural laboratories. Their genomes carry signals that get blurred in more mixed populations. Studies have found that Basques have unusually low rates of certain cancers, but different susceptibility patterns for specific neurological conditions. Research into these differences could unlock insights that benefit everyone. In the genetic uniqueness that was once considered just a curiosity, scientists are now finding potential keys to human health. Here's what I find most profound about all of this. We live in a world where we talk constantly about globalization, about the blending of cultures, about the inevitable homogenization of human societies. And for most of human history, that blending has been the norm. Empires expand, peoples mix, languages disappear. It's the arc of history. But the Basques represent something different. They represent proof that communities can make choices, conscious or unconscious, that preserve who they are across unimaginable stretches of time. Not through violence, not through walls, through culture, through language, through the quiet daily act of choosing to remain themselves. When you hear Euskara being spoken in a mountain village today, this ancient, impossible, solitary language that has no family on earth, you're not just hearing words, you're hearing a direct transmission from Europe's prehistoric past. You're hearing what Europe sounded like before the Indo-Europeans arrived and reshaped the continent's languages. You're hearing something that should have died out 1,000 times but somehow didn't. And the people speaking it? They carry in their DNA the genetic signatures of Iron Age Europeans, preserved intact through more than 2,000 years of history. When you look at a Basque person, you are, in a very real sense, looking at what your own ancestors might have looked like before the great migrations and conquests of recorded history transformed European bloodlines forever. The mystery of the Basques isn't a mystery anymore, but it's still a wonder. Science has given us the answer. Extraordinary isolation, extraordinary cultural resilience, an extraordinary language that acted as an invisible genetic wall. But knowing the answer doesn't make the story any less breathtaking. It makes it more so, because now we understand exactly how improbable it is, how many things had to go right, how many invasions had to be survived, how many generations of ordinary people had to make the ordinary choice of marrying someone from their own valley, speaking their own language, living their own way, for this ancient thread to survive into the 21st century. They remained themselves. Through the Roman Empire and the Moorish conquest and the wars of religion and the Industrial Revolution and 2 world wars and the digital age, they remained themselves. That's not just a history lesson. That's one of the most remarkable stories in the entire human story. So, do you have any Basque heritage? Or does this make you want to dig into your own genetic history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely love to hear where you're from and what you know about your own ancestral roots. And if you found this fascinating, and I really hope you did, hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot more incredible journeys like this one ahead. The world is full of hidden histories, just waiting to be uncovered. Let's uncover them together.